The first thing I noticed about Cedar Hill wasn't the silence everyone warned me about. It was how still everything felt. The kind of stillness that made you wonder if you'd walked into a pause between chapters rather than the start of a new one. The air smelled like pine and damp pavement, and the mountains in the distance sat quietly, like they'd been watching over the town for centuries. I parked outside the Cedar Hill Police Department just after sunrise. The building looked more like an old community center than a precinct. 2 floors, brick walls faded by years of rain. A squirrel darted across the entrance ramp. I couldn't imagine anything like that happening outside my old precinct in Capital City. Stepping inside, it felt like I'd interrupted a conversation that had been going on for years before me. Officers greeting each other by name, coffee mugs already at designated desks. A rhythm I didn't quite fit into yet. I straightened my uniform, trying to look like I wasn't the outsider I knew I was. Captain Brooks spotted me almost immediately. "You must be Officer Evan Reed," she said with a firm nod, barely glancing at the file in her hand. "District transfer. Good record. You'll be assigned to Hale." "Hale?" I repeated before I could stop myself. She raised an eyebrow. "Senior Deputy Logan Hale. You'll be riding with him starting today." The name meant nothing to me, but the nods exchanged between 2 nearby officers did. A quiet kind of respect mixed with something else. Hesitation? Pity? Couldn't tell. Before I could ask anything, Brooks handed me a clipboard. "Patrol schedules in the locker room. Hale's already outside." Already outside, meaning I was late to his standards even though I'd arrived 10 minutes early. I quickened my pace down the corridor, the sound of my boots echoing off the hallway walls. There was a smell of fresh coffee and floor cleaner, an odd mix that reminded me of long shifts in my old city precinct. Posters about community events hung on the notice boards, local fairs, church fundraisers, a missing cat, a world away from the chaos I'd grown used to. By the time I got to the rear lot, the patrol SUV was already running. Logan Hale sat behind the wheel like he'd been carved into the seat. Back straight, arms steady, eyes scanning the surroundings even though nothing moved except a plastic bag caught on a fence post. He didn't look up when I approached. "Reed?" he asked, voice low, steady. "Yes, Evan Reed," I said, opening the passenger door. "Seatbelt before ignition," he said simply. The engine was already on, so I didn't know whether to laugh or apologize. I clicked the seatbelt into place as he shifted the vehicle into drive without acknowledging me again. We rolled out of the lot in silence. It wasn't hostile silence, just empty, like he had no interest in filling it unless absolutely necessary. The radio crackled with the morning check-in from dispatch. Logan responded in a tone so controlled it bordered on emotionless. His eyes remained forward, his posture unchanging, one hand resting lightly on the wheel. Cedar Hill drifted past my window. Tidy houses with white fences, a bakery that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s, a high school with a football field right up against the main road. Joggers waved at us as if patrol cars were just part of the scenery around here. After 10 minutes, I cleared my throat. "So, how long have you been assigned here?" "Long time," he said. That was it. Not a number, not a year, not even a vague attempt at conversation. I tried again. "This town is quieter than I expected. Kind of peaceful." Logan gave a small nod. Not agreeing. Not disagreeing. Just acknowledging sound existed. For the first hour of patrol, he barely spoke except to instruct me on things I thought I already knew. "Radio closer to your chest next time. Call location before stepping out. You missed that license plate by half a digit." My jaw tightened the 3rd time he corrected me. I wasn't a rookie. I'd worked 5 years in one of the toughest districts back home. But somehow, the way he said things wasn't insulting. More like he expected precision because precision had saved his life more than once. By the time we pulled into a small petrol station to check on a suspicious vehicle report, I'd convinced myself this was just how he was: robotic, cold, uninterested in partnership. Someone who preferred solitude. Someone who didn't want a new partner. Someone I'd have to tolerate if I wanted this transfer to work. Inside the lot, everything was quiet except for the hum of a vending machine. A beat-up sedan sat parked by the dumpster, its boot slightly ajar. Logan stepped out first, flashlight in hand even though the sun was already high. His movements were smooth, controlled, almost rehearsed. I followed a few steps behind, trying to match his pace. A sudden clang echoed as something fell behind the dumpster. I flinched instinctively. Logan didn't. "Cedar Hill Police," he called out, voice even. "Step into the open. Hands where I can see them." A teenager slowly emerged, thin, shaking, clutching a torn backpack to his chest. His eyes were red but not from drugs, just fear. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I wasn't doing anything. I was hungry, man." Logan didn't raise his gun, didn't shout, didn't even move aggressively. He simply exhaled. "You live around here?" "No," the teen shook his head. "Ran away. I just needed something to eat." Logan scanned him calmly, checking for weapons, danger, anything out of place. When he finished, he simply said, "There's a shelter 2 blocks down. They won't turn you away." The kid nodded and almost ran off, clutching his bag. When we got back in the vehicle, I shut my door a bit harder than necessary. "You good?" Logan asked suddenly. I blinked. "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" "You jumped at the noise." Heat rose to my cheeks. "Wasn't expecting it." "Normal," he said. "Takes a few weeks to adjust to new terrain." I studied him. For the first time, he wasn't giving me a correction, he was giving me reassurance. It was subtle, but it was there. We drove off again. The silence this time wasn't empty. It had something living in it. Later, during a false alarm at a closed pharmacy, Logan opened the glove compartment and pulled out a wrapped protein bar. "You eaten today?" he asked. I blinked again. Not really." He extended the bar toward me without looking away from the storefront. "Take it." It wasn't an order. It wasn't a kindness he'd thought through. It was a habit, something natural, like he'd done it for someone else many times before. We sat in the vehicle afterward, waiting for the owner to show up and reset the alarm. The street was quiet except for the hum of streetlights warming up. Logan leaned back, and for the first time, his shoulders didn't look impossibly tense. "You always work nights?" I asked softly. "Used to," he replied. "Preferred them." "Why?" "Less people pretending," he said simply. I almost laughed. "You're a real optimist, aren't you?" A tiny smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Barely there. But I saw it. Someone was in there beneath all that armor. When our shift ended, he parked in the lot and turned off the engine with deliberate precision. Then he paused, staring at the dash as if considering whether to speak. "You've got good instincts," he said finally. "Just tighten transitions between calls." I nodded. "Got it." He gave a faint nod in return. 0700 tomorrow. That was the closest thing to a warm goodbye I expected. I stepped out of the vehicle into the cool afternoon air, stretching my stiff shoulders. I could still feel the quiet humming between us, the strange kind that wasn't awkward, just unfinished. When I reached my car, I glanced back. Logan was still sitting inside the patrol SUV, hands resting on the wheel, staring at nothing in particular. Or maybe everything. And for the first time since arriving in Cedar Hill, I felt something settle inside my chest. Maybe this place wasn't just a transfer. Maybe it was the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet. By the second week, Cedar Hill began to feel less like a foreign town and more like a place I was slowly learning to read. Every street had its own rhythm. The morning rush of the bakery, the barking dogs on Alder Lane, the retired couple who waved from their porch every time a patrol car passed. And somewhere inside all that, Logan and I settled into a pattern neither of us had talked about but both of us understood. We never explicitly agreed to sit in the same diner booth every morning, but we did. We never planned to take the long loop past the reservoir at the same point every shift, but somehow that's where we ended up. And Logan, who barely spoke on the first day, now responded with full sentences. Still clipped, still cautious, but unmistakably real. He didn't laugh much, but he smirked at my stupid observations. Like when I commented that the town's main water tower looked like a sad snowman someone forgot to finish painting. That's the ugliest landmark I've ever seen, I muttered as we passed it. Logan's lips twitched. Town committee painted it in '98. Someone donated the wrong shade of blue. They called it sky-friendly. That looks nothing like the sky. That's the point. It wasn't a laugh, but it was something. Something small. Something I found myself wanting more of. Even our silences changed. They weren't walls anymore. They felt like pauses, comfortable ones. Spaces where nothing needed to be said because everything around us already was. The drizzle tapping against the windshield. The hum of the engine. The distant call of a freight train heading toward the mountains. One rainy Thursday night, the quiet thickened enough to feel like a third presence in the car. It had been pouring for hours. Cedar Hill didn't get gentle rain. It got curtain-like sheets that blurred the edges of the world until everything looked washed out and smudged. We pulled under a flickering awning at a gas station, waiting for the storm to calm so we could check a suspicious parked truck a block away. Logan leaned back in his seat, arms relaxed for once, eyes fixed on the streaks racing across the windshield. Feels like the sky's trying to wash the whole town into the river, I said, sipping the hot coffee he'd silently handed me earlier. Seen worse, he murmured. Yeah? You always get this philosophical during storms. He didn't look at me, but his voice softened. Night storms keep things honest. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds like something out of a crime novel. It's true, he went on, shrugging slightly. People hide less when the world's loud. I considered that. You hide less too? He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, maybe. It was the first time he'd ever hinted at anything resembling vulnerability. I watched him in the dim glow of the dashboard. His jaw tense, rainwater dripping from his hair where it had soaked through his cap earlier, the faint crease between his brows that never really left. Ever think about doing something other than this? I asked. His eyes followed a raindrop sliding down the glass. Like what? Oh, I don't know. Teaching, maybe opening a bar somewhere warm. Something low stress. I'm not built for sunshine, he said, and this time I did laugh. Everyone's built for sunshine. Not me. For a second, the corner of his mouth lifted, faint but unmistakable, and something stirred in my chest, something warm and hopeful I wasn't ready to name yet. When the rain eased, we stepped out. Logan checked the truck while I circled the adjoining alley. Turned out to be nothing. Just a local trucker sleeping between long hauls. But as we walked back to the cruiser, our jackets brushing, the electricity in the air had nothing to do with lightning. Later that night, the radio alarm at a pharmacy tripped. False alarm, just like the captain predicted. While we waited for the building owner to arrive, Logan rummaged in the glove box and tossed me a folded napkin. Your sleeve's soaked, he said, gesturing to my arm. I hadn't even noticed. When I looked down, water dripped from my cuff to my wrist. I wiped it with the napkin, but something about that small gesture, the noticing, the offering, tightened something in my chest. Thanks, I said. He nodded, barely there, but I saw it. After the call cleared, we drove down Cedar Ridge Road, headlights sweeping across dark pines and mist rising off the asphalt. The road smelled of rain, deep, earthy, almost sweet. You ever get tired of the job? I asked after a while. Everyone gets tired, he said. Some people are just better at ignoring it. You're one of them? Another silence. His hands tightened on the wheel for just a heartbeat. Used to be, he said. Used to be. Not anymore. Not since when? Since who? Before I could ask more, dispatch radioed in a domestic disturbance on West Bridge Avenue. Logan responded calmly, but I saw the faint sigh escape his lips. Cedar Hill didn't have many violent incidents, but domestic calls were always unpredictable. A man and woman arguing in a cramped living room. Furniture knocked over. A toddler crying in the hallway. Logan took point, guiding the man into the kitchen while I soothed the mother into sitting down. It was tense but manageable, until something hit the floor behind me. A glass mug shattered inches from my feet. I instinctively stepped back, heart thudding. Logan was already between me and the broken pieces, one hand extended slightly like a protective reflex. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," I breathed, just startled. He scanned me once, a quick movement, then guided the father outside with controlled precision. I finished speaking with the mother, getting enough information to calm the situation until backup arrived. When we climbed back into the cruiser, I noticed Logan flexing his fingers subtly. "You hurt your hand?" I asked. "It's nothing. Let me see." "Read, I'm fine." I reached for his wrist before he could pull away. He froze, not because of pain but because contact seemed to unsettle him more than any domestic call ever could. There was a small cut on the back of his knuckle. Nothing serious, but enough to need cleaning. I opened the first aid kit, gently wiping the blood, wrapping the gauze carefully. Logan didn't move, didn't breathe loudly, didn't say a word. His hand was warm, stronger than it looked, and he didn't pull away until I lowered mine. After that night, the precinct jokes began. 2 officers from the traffic division snickered when they saw Logan and me leaving the break room at the same time. "Cedar Hill's new favorite duo," one said. "Look at them. Synchronized movements and everything. Guess Hale finally found someone patient enough," the other added. I laughed it off. Logan didn't. His jaw tightened, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it like I was. He finished the report he was holding and walked out of the room without saying a word. The jokes didn't stop. They got more personal. "Reed, you and Hale carpooling to work yet? You two filling out a joint tax return next? Careful, rookie. He's protective of his favorites." I brushed them aside because they didn't mean anything to me. But Logan? Logan grew quieter. He volunteered for solo calls. He started responding with one-word answers again. He avoided looking at me longer than a second. It felt like losing something I wasn't even sure I had. 2 nights later, we responded to a burglary suspect sighting near the abandoned textile mill. The place smelled of rust and wet concrete. Shadows stretched across the broken walkway like something living. We split up, circling opposite sides of the building. I found the suspect first. A man with wild eyes, gripping a box cutter tight enough for his knuckles to turn white. "Police!" I shouted. "Drop it!" He didn't. He lunged. And before I could even react, someone slammed into me from the side. My back hit the wall hard. Logan's arm braced across me. The suspect's blade skimmed Logan's vest with a sharp hiss. The next few seconds were a blur, Logan wrestling the man to the ground, pinning him with precise, brutal efficiency. When backup arrived and took the suspect, Logan stood 2 feet from me, breathing hard, sleeve torn, knuckles bleeding again. "You okay?" he asked gruffly. Yeah," I managed. "You." I handled it. Something snapped in me. "You shoved me like I'm a rookie." "You froze," he said sharply. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did," he insisted. "If I hadn't moved, that blade would have found you." "That's not your call," I shot back. "We're partners. You don't get to decide who takes the hit." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His chest rose and fell, a storm behind his eyes. "You don't get it," he murmured. "Then make me get it." His voice cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to break something open. "Because I can't afford to care this much." The words hit harder than the shove. And neither of us said another word the rest of the night. The cruiser felt smaller that night. Not physically. Nothing had changed about the seats or the dashboard or the overhead light that flickered whenever we hit a bump. But something in the air tightened until it felt like we were both breathing borrowed oxygen. After the confrontation outside the mill, Logan didn't look at me once. Not when we filled out the arrest sheet. Not when we cleared the scene. Not even when I tried twice to say something, anything, that would break the suffocating quiet. He kept his eyes on the road like the lines on the pavement were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. It wasn't anger. It was retreat. A full, controlled withdrawal into himself. The wipers beat a slow rhythm across the windshield, pushing away the fine mist drifting over the town. The mill lights faded behind us, replaced by the dark outline of pine trees leaning over the road like silent witnesses. I finally spoke. You can't just say something like that and expect me to understand. No response. You said you can't afford to care this much. What does that even mean? Silence. Not cold, just locked. I pressed on. If you're worried about the jokes in the station, it's not the jokes. His voice was rough, strained. He kept staring ahead. Then what? Nothing. The road stretched on in front of us, a tunnel of empty night, and I could feel him slipping away, like whatever fragile connection we'd built had shattered the moment that blade grazed his vest. Dispatch crackled with a routine welfare check, and Logan answered with professional calm, even though something in his tone sounded scraped raw. We handled the call quietly. A false alarm. An elderly man accidentally hit the panic button on his phone. Logan spoke gently, kindly, but the moment we got back to the cruiser, the wall snapped back up. I couldn't take the silence anymore. When we reached the edge of Cedar Hill's main strip, I reached forward and flicked on the hazard lights. Logan tensed. What are you doing? We're talking. We're on duty. I don't care. He inhaled sharply, jaw tightening. For a second, I thought he might actually tell me to get out of the car. Instead, he breathed out slowly, turned on the blinker, and pulled the cruiser off onto a quiet river road. The same one we always drove past but never stopped on. He killed the engine. The world went still, completely still. The only sounds were the faint hum of the river below and the soft ticking of the cooling engine. The moon hung low over the water, a pale reflection wiggling with every ripple. Logan kept both hands on the wheel, fingers gripping it so tightly I thought the leather might tear. You want to know what I meant? He said eventually, voice so low I almost missed it. Fine. He didn't look at me. I had a partner once, Marcus. We worked together for almost 3 years. His breath hitched, subtle but unmistakable. He was good, better than good, the kind of officer people trusted instantly. I stayed quiet, listening. He had this way of making even the worst nights feel manageable, he continued, always cracking jokes, always telling me I needed to unclench before I aged 5 decades early. The ghost of a smile flickered across his face but vanished just as quickly. One night we got a call. Armed robbery at a liquor store on the South End. Backup was close but Marcus didn't wait. He went in because that's who he was. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. I followed him, but not fast enough. Logan swallowed hard. By the time I got inside, he stopped. He didn't need to finish. I felt the conclusion settle heavily between us. He kept his gaze fixed on the river, like looking at me might make the memory sharper. I told myself I did everything right. I wrote it in the report, repeated it to the captain, to his family. His voice thinned, frayed at the edges. But I knew better. I knew that if I just said something, maybe he wouldn't have gone in alone. Said what? I asked gently. His answer came as a whisper. How much I cared. My chest tightened painfully. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the dark water. I thought caring was the mistake. I thought if I pushed people away, if I stayed distant, quiet, unreachable, then I wouldn't risk losing someone again. Rain clouds drifted over the moon, dimming the light. Logan's silhouette softened, like he was slowly deflating. So when they assigned me another partner, he said, voice cracking again, I kept everyone at arm's length. Officers came and went. None stayed long. Maybe they saw the wall. Maybe I built it on purpose. He exhaled shakily. And then you arrived, he said. I felt something jolt inside me. You with your stupid jokes about the water tower, he murmured. And the way you talk to people like they matter. The way you listen. The way you look at me like I'm not a ghost. My breath caught. You weren't supposed to get under my skin, he said softly. But you did. I tried to ignore it. I tried to distance myself again when the station started teasing. When I caught myself noticing things I shouldn't. What things? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. He closed his eyes, almost pained. How you smile when you're nervous. How you lean forward when you're about to say something stupid. How you always check the back seat before you get in the car. Every single time. I felt heat spread across my face. He continued before I could speak. When that suspect came at you tonight, something in me snapped. My body moved before my brain did. And all I could think was, he finally turned his head, eyes meeting mine for the first time since the alley. I can't lose another partner, he whispered. Not you. That was when the realization hit me. Not just that he cared, but how deeply he'd been burying it. I let the silence stretch for a moment, giving him room to breathe. Then I said softly, caring isn't a weakness, Logan. He let out a broken laugh. Feels like one. It's not, I insisted. Not when it's real. He looked at me, really looked, and in the dim light, I saw every unspoken word he'd swallowed for years. The fear, the guilt, the longing, the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. I didn't reach for him. I didn't move closer. I just sat there, letting the understanding settle between us like a bridge finally being built. You're not alone anymore, I said quietly. Not unless you want to be. For a moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, hesitantly, like he was afraid the world might crack if he tried, Logan turned his palm upward on the console between us. An invitation. My heartbeat kicked up, but I didn't hesitate. I placed my hand on his. His fingers curled around mine, carefully, gently, like he was relearning how to hold something fragile. A long breath escaped him. Not relief. Release. We stayed like that for what felt like ages. No words. No explanations. Just warmth in the dark. The river murmured below. The stars peeked through the clouds. And in that quiet space, his thumb brushed the side of my hand. A tiny motion, barely there, but it said everything he couldn't. When dispatch finally called in the morning patrol check, neither of us moved. For the first time since I'd arrived in Cedar Hill, I understood exactly what that silence between us meant. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't tension. It was trust. Fragile, hard-earned, and finally shared. The next morning felt different before I'd even opened my eyes. It wasn't anything dramatic. No sudden revelation, no cinematic flashback, nothing that made me sit upright with a gasp. It was subtler than that. A warmth that had settled somewhere deep inside me. Quiet but steady. Like a light left on in a room I didn't know I needed. When I walked into the precinct, Logan was standing by the coffee machine. Same uniform, same expression, same rigid posture. But the second his eyes flicked to mine, something softened. Barely, almost invisible, but I saw it. He held my gaze a half-beat longer than usual before clearing his throat and stepping aside like nothing happened. Coffee? He asked. He'd never offered before. I nodded, trying to hide the way my pulse picked up. Sure. He handed me a cup, black, exactly how I take it, then motioned toward the door. We're on Meadow Loop today. Lots of ground to cover. Everything sounded the same, but nothing felt the same. Our routine unfolded the way it always did, but with subtle shifts. Small gestures that carried more weight than any confession ever could. He opened the passenger door a little wider for me. Let his shoulder brush mine when we passed each other. Turned the radio volume down like he didn't want anything interrupting the space between us. Halfway through the shift, as we pulled onto the highway overlooking Cedar Hill Valley, he glanced at me briefly. You sleep all right? He asked, tone casual but laced with curiosity. Yeah. You? His fingers tapped the wheel once. Better than usual. Better than usual. I knew what that meant even if he didn't say it out loud. We didn't talk about the river. Not the hand he offered. Not the way I'd taken it. Not the silent, trembling breath he'd let out when I didn't pull away. But the memory lived between us like a secret we weren't ready to unwrap yet. Later that afternoon, we got the call. A missing child. Age 5. Last seen near the Douglas Avenue Play Park. By the time we reached the scene, the sky was heavy with the smell of rain again. Parents crying. Neighbors gathering. Radios buzzing with every officer in the area searching. I felt the tightness in my chest before we even stepped out. Logan noticed immediately. You take the north end, he said, voice firm but steady. I'll sweep by the creek. Keep your radio open. He didn't leave until I nodded. I moved through the playground, calling the boy's name, ducking under slides, checking behind benches, scanning every shape in the corner of my vision. The world narrowed to one goal: find the child. Then, from somewhere near the creek, I heard Logan's voice. Not shouting, just sharp, focused. Over here. I sprinted toward the sound. Logan was crouched by the wide culvert pipe, leaning in gently. Inside, curled up and crying softly, was a little boy in a red raincoat. "It's okay," Logan murmured. "I'm not leaving. Come here." His voice was the same voice he used with frightened teens, distraught parents, even me when I arrived in this town. Calm, certain, quietly protective. The boy crawled into Logan's arms, burying his face in his shoulder. Logan lifted him effortlessly, hands spread protectively across the small back. As we carried him back toward the road, the boy's parents ran forward, sobbing in relief. When the mother pulled her son into her arms, Logan stepped back slightly, jaw tight. Not from stress, but from emotion he didn't want anyone else to see. He looked at me then, and that look, it was trust. Not the careful, calculated trust of colleagues. Something deeper, something shared. That night, after all the reports were filed and the adrenaline faded, I headed to the parking lot expecting to go home alone like always. But as I reached my car, I heard him say, "Evan." I turned. Logan was leaning against his truck, hands in his jacket pockets, expression unreadable but somehow softer than the night before. "You want to debrief?" he asked. "Now?" He shrugged one shoulder. "I've got food, and beer, and it's off the record." A part of me wondered if he regretted telling me everything at the river. Another part wondered if this was him trying to not run from what happened. I nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." He didn't smile, but the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. Logan's house was exactly what I expected. Clean, minimal, quietly lived in. Not a single piece of clutter. A framed academy photo on the wall. A worn pair of boots neatly placed by the door. A small set of guitar strings on a shelf, even though I wasn't sure he still played. He slipped off his jacket. "You all right with chicken and potatoes?" "Yeah, that's fine." He cooked like he patrolled. Efficient, focused, making as little noise as possible. I found myself watching his hands more often than necessary. The way he chopped vegetables with controlled precision. The way he wiped down the counter whenever a drop of water landed on it. We ate on the couch, plates balanced on our knees, football murmuring low from the TV. The room felt warm, almost cozy, like neither of us wanted to break the spell. After a while, Logan set his plate on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the muted screen. Then he spoke. "I didn't plan on feeling anything," he said carefully. "Not for anyone." My heart hammered, but I didn't move. "But you," he continued, eyes fixed on the TV even though he wasn't watching it. "You made it difficult to keep everything buried." I swallowed hard. "Logan." He shook his head, not dismissing me, just steadying himself. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Whatever this is, I'm better at shutting things down than letting them in." His honesty felt like a gift he didn't give easily. I shifted slightly closer. "You don't have to know. We can figure it out together." He looked at me then. Really looked. "You sure?" he asked quietly. "I'm sure." A silence settled between us. Soft, warm, alive. Logan hesitated for one long moment before reaching out, palm up, the way he had the night before. I placed my hand in his. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in. Our foreheads touched first. Just that, a soft press of warmth. Then, with a breath that brushed my lips, he kissed me. It wasn't desperate, wasn't rushed. It was gentle, warm, and full of unspoken gratitude. A quiet confirmation of everything we'd felt but never said. When he pulled back, he didn't let go of my hand. We sat there on that worn couch, the TV still playing softly, our hands tangled on the blanket. He didn't need to speak. Neither did I. The silence between us had finally changed for good. It wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a promise. The following days moved with a strange new lightness. Logan wasn't suddenly talkative or expressive. He didn't start smiling at the station or acting different around the others. But there was something undeniably new in the way he carried himself around me. He brought me coffee without asking, asked what I'd done on my day off, waited for me in the locker room before shift instead of heading out alone. At the station, the teasing died down naturally. People recognized the shift in our rhythm but respected our professionalism. We didn't flaunt anything, didn't need to. Everything lived in the quiet moments. A look across the cruiser during patrol. A brief brush of fingers when passing each other a file. A shared smile that didn't need explaining. The world didn't shift dramatically. No fireworks. No big declarations. Just trust. Growing. Building. Settling into something real. Something neither of us had expected but both of us had needed. And every time I got into the patrol car beside him, and he glanced over with that barely there softening in his eyes, I felt it again. This wasn't the beginning of something. It was the continuation of everything we'd been quietly moving toward from the moment I stepped into Cedar Hill. The strange thing about falling into a new rhythm is how natural it can feel, even when the path to it was anything but. A few weeks after that quiet night on Logan's couch, life didn't look dramatically different on the outside. We were still two officers clocking in every morning, still running the same routes, still grabbing the same coffees from the same diner that never changed its menu. But on the inside, everything felt shifted, softer, more certain. The first sign of the new normal came in the car. We always sat close, given the cruiser wasn't exactly built for personal space. But now the closeness carried a different warmth. Sometimes our arms brushed when the car bounced over a pothole. Sometimes Logan's elbow nudged mine when he adjusted the radio. And sometimes, when the shift was slow and the town felt hushed, he rested his hand on the console between us, palm open, like a quiet invitation. Not every day, not even most days, but enough to say it wasn't accidental. Enough to say this was something that belonged to both of us. People in the precinct sensed it too, even if they didn't say anything. The jokes had mostly stopped. The air around us had gained a kind of respectful understanding. Maybe they recognized how well we worked together. Maybe they simply saw two people who trusted each other more deeply than words could explain. Lieutenant Martin once walked past us in the hallway, coffee in hand, and said, "You two operate like a single unit. Saves me paperwork." Logan responded with his usual stoic nod. I rolled my eyes, but inside the comment warmed me. We handled calls with a fluidity that felt earned, a synergy built from months of learning each other's instincts. When Logan raised a hand, I already knew his next move. When I stepped forward, he shifted in perfect sync beside me. During traffic stops, domestic calls, welfare checks, accident scenes, our rhythm was steady, sure, and quietly protective. Not the protective instinct of fear, the protective instinct of care. Our relationship didn't explode into existence. It opened like the slow sunrise that often greeted us at the edge of Cedar Hill Valley after long shifts. We found our moments in between the routine, tucked inside everyday tasks. At the gas station one morning, Logan stood beside me while I filled the tank. The air smelled of diesel and the faint sweetness of pine from the forest across the road. The world was quiet, just the hum of traffic far off. He handed me a bottle of water without a word. I took it and brushed my thumb slowly over the back of his hand before pulling away. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He simply held my gaze for a second longer than he ever had. And that was enough. Another night, after a double shift involving a house fire we couldn't do much about, Logan drove us to the far edge of town. The flame still burned behind my eyes, the parents shouting their daughter's name, the sirens, the thick smoke, the kind of night that reminded you why the job could break you if you weren't careful. We parked by the reservoir, the kind of still lake that mirrored the sky like glass. Logan turned off the engine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. After a while, he leaned slightly closer, not quite touching, but enough that the tension in my chest eased. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly. "So are you." "Different reasons," he murmured. I smiled faintly. "You want to talk about it?" He shook his head. Not tonight. Then we don't have to. He nodded, grateful. We sat there until the sky softened from black to blue and the world felt just a little less heavy. Sometimes comfort wasn't in words. Sometimes it was in presence. In the knowledge that when the worst parts of the world pressed against you, someone sat beside you and refused to move. A week later, we got called to assist with a roadside breakdown. A family visiting from out of state had blown a tire. It took us 20 minutes to help them sort it out, and the father insisted on giving us fries from the bag they'd bought for the trip. We sat in a booth at the diner afterward, fries between us, boots propped on the metal bar beneath the table. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across Logan's face. He watched me for a moment, not intensely, just thoughtfully. "You're different now," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Lighter," he said, leaning back. "You don't carry everything in your shoulders anymore." "And whose fault is that?" The corner of his mouth curved. I could guess. I nudged his foot under the table. "Maybe you should." Our banter had changed too, softer, warmer, threaded with an ease that hadn't been there before. There was one night off we shared, the first in months. No emergencies, no paperwork, no shifts waiting in the morning. Just two men in a quiet house, sleeves rolled up, cooking a meal together while music played low from Logan's old radio. After dinner, he reached for me unexpectedly, hand brushing my hip, pulling me gently into the living room. No words, just a small gesture asking for closeness. He put on an old record, soft, crackling, the kind of music you'd play in a memory, and we stood there, our foreheads touching again. No dancing, no movement, just breathing the same quiet air. His hand rested on the back of my neck. Mine found its place on his waist. A slow, steady heartbeat pressed a guy. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a declaration. It was something deeper, a moment you don't speak about because the moment itself says everything. A few days later, back on shift, we passed the riverbank where he'd opened up to me, where he'd told me about Marcus, where he'd let me see the parts of himself he never showed to anyone else. We didn't stop, but he slowed the cruiser slightly. The window was down, letting in the soft rush of river air. And then, without looking away from the road, he reached across the console and rested his hand briefly on my thigh. Not long, not lingering, just enough to say, "I remember." Enough to say, "That night mattered." Enough to say, "You matter." The cruiser became our world. A place where we learned how to navigate everything between us with small touches and long glances and shared breaths. We didn't flaunt anything at the station. Didn't need to. Nothing about it felt performative. It just felt right. People asked occasionally, "You two still partnering?" Logan would answer with a steady yes. And something in his tone made them stop asking more. No gossip. No drama. Just understanding. The world respected what it didn't see but sensed clearly. One morning after a long, exhausting night, DUI calls, a noise complaint gone sour, and a family dispute that left both of us drained. We cruised through the outskirts of Cedar Hill. The sun hadn't risen fully yet. The sky was a soft gradient of lavender and gold. Mist hovered above the fields. Logan rolled down the window, resting one arm on the frame. The wind tugged at his hair, his uniform, the tired lines near his eyes. He glanced over at me, a small smile pulling at his lips. "You still okay being my partner?" he asked, voice quiet. I turned toward him, letting my smile grow. "Only if I can be more than that." He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't need to. His smile deepened, slow and warm, the kind that reached his eyes. The kind I rarely saw but always waited for. He reached across the console and took my hand. Not tentatively, not nervously, but firmly, surely, like a man who finally understood that care wasn't the dangerous thing. Losing it was. We drove like that, fingers intertwined, until the sun climbed fully over the horizon, washing the inside of the cruiser in gold. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Wasn't fighting against the job or the silence or the fear of being seen. I was just home, Right there, in the passenger seat of a patrol car rolling through a small town in Washington, with the man who had spent months trying not to care, now finally holding on.